I would like to welcome you to the Department of Art and Design at the University of Alberta in Edmonton's Winter Speaker Series. Our speaker series is designed to work with art and design faculty to support guest speakers in the area of fine arts, design studies, and art history. This is the second talk in our speaker series for the winter term. Our next talk will be on March 4th, and our speaker will be Jackson Two Bears at 2 p.m. I'm delighted on behalf of the Design Studies team to welcome Ellen Lupton and Dr. Bon Ku today. Just a few notes before we begin. This talk is going to be from, well, 4:15 till for about half an hour, I would say, and then we'll have some time for questions. And I'm sure there'll be quite a few. We're going to record this talk so that we can post it on the Department of Art and Design's YouTube channel. If you can just mute your microphone while the discussion is happening, that would be great. And then if you have a question, please post it in the chat and we'll get to it after the talk. So the University of Alberta respectfully acknowledges that we are situated on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of the First Nation and Métis people. I would now like to introduce Ellen Lupton and Dr. Bon Ku. Ellen Lupton is a senior curator of contemporary design at Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York City. Her exhibitions include Herbert, Bauhaus Master, Face Values, Understanding Artificial Intelligence, How Posters Work, and The Senses, Design Beyond Vision. Lupton is the Betty Cooke and William O. Steinmetz Design Chair at Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, where she has authored numerous books on design processes, including Thinking with Type, which we all know, Graphic Design Thinking, and Graphic Design, The New Basics. Her recent books, Design as Storytelling and Health Design Thinking, were published by Cooper Hewitt. She's an AIGA Gold Medalist and a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Bon Ku is the director of the Health Design Lab at Thomas Jefferson University, where he created the first design thinking program at a medical school. He is the Marta and Robert Adelson Professor of Medicine and Design and a practicing emergency medicine physician. Bon's lab teaches future physicians to apply human-centered design to healthcare challenges and tackles healthcare inequalities as a form of social justice. Bon is the host of the Design Lab podcast, which I've just started listening to, and I have to say I'm hooked, and has co-written the book Health Design Thinking with Ellen Lupton. He was also a regular panelist, and we have to hear more about this on the television show Chasing the Cure. Please welcome Ellen Lupton and Dr. Bon Ku.
Hi there.
Virtual class.
Great to be here. Bon and I never get to see
you.
each other except at events like this, so it's really fun. So I think I'm going to share the screen, and Bon and I are going to talk about how we wrote this book and some of the ideas in it, and also what's going on now, which is kind of different from what was going on then. And then we love to talk to you about health design and anything else. And it's great to see like Nancy Green here. Wow. So thanks for coming. I appreciate that. Okay. All right, Bon, take it away.
I'll kick off. So I'm based here in Philadelphia, and this is the emergency room where I work. And I wanted to share with you some of my perspective on the pandemic and design's role in the pandemic. And as you know, in the US, we had no national strategy for testing, containment, contact tracing, how to deal with surge capacity. And what I observed working in this emergency room in Philadelphia is that the people with the worst health outcomes were those in Black and Brown communities. And these were the same communities that actually had the worst health outcomes before the pandemic. Ellen and I want to talk about how design can play a role in reimagining a better future for healthcare, and practically how better design can actually save lives. So next slide. At my hospital, I run a research group called the Health Design Lab. And what our group does is that we apply design thinking to healthcare. We look at problems in healthcare as design challenges, and we teach medical students about design research and how to solve problems from a designer's mindset. Because I believe that creativity is not just an important skill for those in creative fields, like many of us listening here, but also it's a really important skill for those who are taking care of patients. Next slide. Some of my earliest inspirations for starting this lab and this way of training doctors is a test kitchen for a restaurant. And some of the world's best restaurants have test kitchens like this one pictured here. It's from Noma in Copenhagen. It's a world famous restaurant there. The chef, Rene Redzepi, he uses his test kitchen as an R&D facility. He sources local ingredients that are in season. He creates new inventive dishes, designs some of the most creative menus on the planet, and their test kitchen fuels their creative process. Next slide. So I thought, it'd be cool if we had a test kitchen at my hospital. And so what we did was we repurposed an abandoned space in the hospital, and we converted it into a teaching facility and a design studio. Here we prototype products, services, devices, experiences, and we encourage doctors, medical students, and others to take on a creative process. We give medical students and doctors a safe space for experimentation and the permission to fail. Many of us in healthcare aren't used to failing, and so that's kind of like a new experience for us. And what we do is we take ingredients from simple materials that can be found on this prototyping cart, for example. We create sketches, journey maps, storyboards. We have other high-tech prototyping tools like 3D printers that allow us to create higher resolution prototypes. So we've had a lot of fun over the past 5 to 6 years making these new recipes for healthcare, but we didn't have an easy way to share our creative process. And I thought it'd be great if we had a kind of a recipe book for our test kitchen. So next slide. And that's how Ellen Lupton came into play.
So I had the pleasure of meeting Bon, I guess it's 3 years ago now, at an event, and we were both panelists on the event, and he mentioned that he needed a cookbook for his design lab, and this is something that Cooper Hewitt has had a long-term interest in, is design thinking and healthcare. So I'm like, yeah, well, let's just do it, and it was as easy as that. That's our first night that we met each other, and it was kind of an instant healthcare design chemistry, right? It was super great. And over a period of a little bit over a year, we put this book together on Amtrak, in Bon's lab, and lots of email, and put together a book that really synthesizes knowledge from Bon's lab, as well as ideas and case studies from people working across the field of health design, and taking the fairly well-known principles of design thinking, which are established maybe 30 years now as a methodology for approaching design creatively and with a user-centered focus. We built on that and presented it in this book specifically around healthcare. So taking those familiar principles and applying them over and over again to healthcare situations. And the book is meant to be accessible and fun and playful and serious at the same time, and to make sense for designers, but also for doctors, medical students, nurses, pharmacy people in the healthcare industry, as it is referred to in our nation. And so I wanted to walk you through just some of the design principles and methods in the book. And I know there's a lot of designers in the room, which is really great. And so I want you to kind of empathize with me here as a designer, trying to think, what should a doctor know about design? If you were gonna lay out some basic principles and explain what this is all about, you know, what would be important, right? Like fonts, probably not, but lots of other stuff, right? So one of the principles is human-centered. And sometimes when I say that to people, they're like, well, isn't all design human-centered? Like, isn't that the whole point? But actually, if you look at the history of design, or the way design is practiced today, design isn't always human-centered. It might be centered around aesthetics, or around a business challenge, or an engineering challenge, or sustainability, for example, which is not the same as human-centered. It's almost defying human appetites and trying to constrain them. So when we talk about human-centered design, it really is a focus. It's a particular orientation. So these are two pieces from the collection at Cooper Hewitt. One is an incredible, beautiful design for a doorknob, inspired by what music would look like. It is totally poetic, abstract, ornamental, fantastic, and not really about human needs or human use, right? And this is one of the functions of design, is to go beyond, right? Is to amaze us with its poetry. The piece on the right is an add-on that you can put on an existing doorknob, specifically a round doorknob, which are notoriously hard to turn if you have any difficulty with dexterity. And it turns your round doorknob into a universal design lever, which people lacking dexterity can use by hitting it with their elbow or with a wrist and open the door. So that is human-centered design. And a big part of human-centered design is empathy. And empathy is the attempt, always imperfect, to imagine and experience someone else's point of view. Empathy is not the same as being the user. To do that, you have to actually co-design with users. Users have to be part of the design team. But empathy is a way for someone who is not the user to attempt to take that subject position. And so this is a project actually from Jefferson, where Bon teaches, where a team of designers and medical students were trying to solve a problem, which is gynecological exams in the emergency room. So many of you have experienced gynecological exams, and some of you have probably experienced them in an emergency room, which is no fun, okay? And so the problem with this exam in an emergency room is there's not a proper table for doing this that elevates the body in the appropriate way to make it accessible for examination. So what often happens is that the doctor or nurse or caregivers shove a bedpan under the pelvis of the patient. And this is demeaning. It doesn't work especially well for anybody. So this ingenious design is a collapsible wedge. Resembles a little bit wedge pillows used for sexual enhancement. You might be familiar with that, but this is just for medical use. And it folds flat, which means it's very convenient for emergency rooms, which never have any place to put anything, right? There's just shit piled everywhere. And part of the process of designing it is that all the male identifying people on the team had to experience getting a gynecological exam. They had to have empathy for that experience. And that needs to be part of the design process. So this is a great product that was developed start to finish in Bon's program, and meets the needs of multiple users, the patient, but also the hospital workers and facility with their needs for something that's easy to store and inexpensive. What else did we think a doctor or a medical student needs to know about design? Well, visualizing is really important. So if you have an idea and it's just in your head, you can't really share it with other people. So you need to do sketches and prototypes and graphics and diagrams. So we try to convey some of that information in the book. What are the different kinds of visualizing? How do they work? So for example, color, understanding color as being coded, right? That red means danger or stop, and yellow means caution or slow, and green is like, yes, 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 go. And that's very important to understand the symbolic meaning of color versus arbitrary meaning, right? Versus using color to convey data. So for example, in a map, you might have a heat map between blue and red and shades in between. And there you are using color to express these polarities in a data set. So stuff like that, it's basic design stuff. Easy peasy for all you graphic designers, but new if you're new to design. And these are important principles. Then another section of the book is about methods. And I know this is some of the things that you all are studying in design research, right? What are the methods for solving problems, for getting ideas, for working with a team, for talking to patients, all of that. Many methods. So it's all these like short chapters that introduce things that you can do and how and why to do them. So one of them is a storyboard. And who would have ever thought a doctor would need a storyboard, right? Storyboards are for cartoonists and filmmakers. But it turns out that storyboards are essential for service design. So we have a whole section about how to make storyboards, how to create, scaffold the experiences around storyboards that make it easier for people to generate them. Storyboards can be photographic, they don't have to be drawn. So those of you who are developing service designs in your class, this is a really great technique for acting out what might be happening with a patient and an app. And taking some simple photographs and then in Photoshop, adding your graphics and text to really tell the whole story. So, and then you can animate it really easily too, like just put it in PowerPoint and suddenly you're walking people through something that feels like a movie of the real story of this unfortunate person who can't breathe. And then another section of the book is about case studies. I'm just going to show you a few before handing it back to Bon to talk about other stuff. So case studies are like, well, how does it all come together? Whoops, I think I have a missing slide there. Missing slides. Okay, so Google Deck does not like my high-res images. This is some graphic design that was developed to solve a big problem. Whoops, like all my slides are messed up. A big problem in emergency rooms, which is people getting violent. This is really serious. Bon can tell you all about it. My friend Risa, she, wow, the stories about how people behave in emergency departments. And it's been discovered that one of the reasons people get angry is because they don't like waiting. And nobody likes waiting. So this design team in the UK put together new signage and patient education material that simply explains why you're waiting and where the patient is in the process of waiting. And it's cheap, it's vinyl. Anybody can take this idea and apply it to your own hospital. And it works, it reduces violence. And it doesn't only reduce violence, it reduces everyday garden variety anxiety in the emergency department about why am I waiting, right? Have they forgotten me? What's happening? So it's empathy, right? It's signage that conveys empathy. This is an incredible project called PillPack, which was a startup that came out of IDEO and then was bought by Amazon, of course. and it becomes your pharmacy. And so the pill pack pharmacy sends you all your pills packaged in these little like condom sized units with clear labeling about when to take it and what to take it with. So for someone that takes a lot of pills, incredible transformation from having all these different bottles and distributing them into some kind of pill carrier. This service does it for you, which is really great. Service design, graphic design, industrial design, all coming together to completely rethink a familiar and everyday problem, especially for people with chronic illnesses or older people who may take a lot of pills every day. It's also really important to recognize patients as designers. This is a piece by Molly Bunnell, who's a product designer and fashion designer who has a chronic illness that puts her in the hospital a lot. And she doesn't like traditional hospital clothing. So she wanted to make this personal. And how could you create your own fashion that allows for in-hospital healthcare treatments on a regular basis? And so she had to make something that works for her, but also that works for the nurses, right? That's easy to launder, that's easy to access the body where the body needs to be accessed. And so often with healthcare products, and you'll definitely get this doing your research, those of you in the design research class, there's not just one user. There's multiple users, and they all have to be considered. They're all part of the design process. And then this project is also by a patient. It's called Visual Health History, and it was created by Katie McCurdy, who has complicated health problems and became exhausted explaining them over and over again to new caregivers. So she started creating these maps that explained all of her symptoms and the history of when they occurred in relation to events in her life. And now she provides that service to other patients. And it's incredible. It allows patients to communicate more clearly to caregivers and has become a really crucial part of their care. So that's our book. And we're thrilled that some of you are enjoying it and using it. And I'm going to pass it over to Bon just to talk about what he's doing now, which is super important.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. I wanted to share a little bit about, when our book came out, it was right at the beginning of the pandemic here on the East Coast. And so what turned out to be this recipe cookbook that we had really, for me, was a field manual during this pandemic. So I want to share a few examples how we literally applied some of the principles and methods that we had been developing over the past years during this pandemic. So we already had this mindset of making, building, and testing. Our lab was in a great position to anticipate and prepare for things like supply chain disruptions during the pandemic. Those simple nasal pharyngeal swabs that we use for COVID-19 testing, hospitals in the US were running out of them. So what we did in a matter of days is we repurposed our lab into a manufacturing facility using an open source file. We 3D printed 35,000 of these swabs to use as a reserve for COVID testing. Next slide. And one design method that we have been using so much during the pandemic is prototyping. We don't do a lot of that in healthcare, and I'm a physician. I haven't done a lot of that before, but prototyping has been really essential to help us to spark new creative ideas and solutions. It gives us the ability to think with our hands. It's an iterative process for us. And we've seen so many examples across the planet of teams of clinicians using prototyping to come up with creative solutions, like this airway box that was inspired by those plexiglass shields that we see all over restaurants. And so here's our team testing out a prototype of an airway shield for when we do an aerosolizing procedure, like airway intubation on a patient with COVID-19 pneumonia. Next slide. And what we've learned is that prototypes don't necessarily need to be a fancy device or medical product. Prototypes for us have been a great way to communicate with stakeholders in the healthcare system. This is an example of a prototype that we use. We partner with a architecture firm, Kieran Timberlake, based here in Philadelphia, and we brainstorm with them of how we could socially distance patients in the ER. At the height of the pandemic, our volumes decreased by like 50%. And as our volumes picked back up, we had the situation where we had patients coming in with COVID, but then other patients without COVID, and how do we keep them apart? So this is something that we had to implement in real time of how are we going to keep patients safe while they're waiting to be seen. Next slide. This is a great example here from where many of you are at in Canada. It's St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. The clinical care team there built a temporary waiting unit for a trauma unit. And they prototype using simple materials like I showed you in the beginning of the talk, like we have in our lab, like tape and cardboard. They made handwritten signs, and they used role playing to get feedback from stakeholders. And what this did was it saved the clinical team a lot of time, because during this pandemic, we didn't have a lot of time to research and test out solutions. We literally had to implement them in a matter of days. Next slide. And I want to end with an example of what our team has been doing over the past 4 months here in Philadelphia. We have launched a COVID-19 testing site in Black and brown communities here in Philadelphia. And because what we have learned was that there are testing deserts here in Philly, and those communities, like this one pictured here, have had worse health outcomes. I talked with a young woman waiting in line to get a COVID test, and she said trying to get a COVID test, and this was back during Thanksgiving, was trying to get like a new PlayStation during Christmas time was impossible. She had made multiple appointments throughout the week at Rite Aid and CVS, but they kept on getting canceled. Some of our pharmacies were looted during some of the protests that happened. And so it was really hard for someone to get a simple test to determine if they had COVID or not. Next slide. And, in order for us to, hunt down this virus, we really needed to figure out who had it. And, and we had this, hey, anyone who wants to get a COVID test should be able to get a COVID test. So what we did was we partnered with the city of Philadelphia, and we literally launched a couple of testing sites in parking lots, one in a church, one in a charter school here in Philadelphia. Next slide. But I'm not a testing expert, and neither any of us on our team. We haven't done anything like this before. So we had to figure out what that journey was going to be for someone coming into a parking lot, walking up to a parking lot, or driving to a parking lot and to get a COVID test. So we use digital whiteboards like this one. It's a journey map of what it might look like for a person to either walk up or drive up to get a COVID test. Next slide. And what journey maps allowed us to do was to give us multiple layers of a user's experience over time and space. So here is the journey map of a car pulling into the COVID testing site, the one that we set up at a church in Northwest Philadelphia. And next slide. And here is it in real time after we set it up on our busiest day right before Thanksgiving here in the US. We had over 350 patients come in a space of 6 hours to get a COVID test, and that car line wrapped around the city block. And what I appreciate about design's role during the pandemic, it really helped us to be creative, and it challenged some of the traditional mindsets that we have in healthcare, that even though we were a team that were not experienced setting up mobile community COVID testing sites, that the design process really helped us to do this and helped us to think outside the box and be creative. And I think towards the future, as we think about these communities have been hit hard, there's a role for design to play in how to reset our healthcare system and to take care of the most vulnerable in our society. And that's end for me and Ellen. So should we open this up to questions?
I have a question.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Ellen. This is wonderful. Thank you. Having been involved in health design a lot, I'm fascinated with this. I guess my question is about the people you work with, Bon. Do you have a lot of receptivity in your hospital? I know Jefferson Hospital, you're Jefferson, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's a great hospital. Do you find a lot of appetite for this, or is it a push?
There is a lot of appetite because I don't really call it like design per se. I don't really I go, hey, we're gonna launch a COVID-19 testing site, and
yeah.
And we kind of sneak in design there, right? So I don't lead with design first. So that's why, I'm a practicing clinician, I'm a educator at my school, I'm a researcher, and who happens to use some design principles in my practice and in my research and in some of the interventions that we do.
Well, in my experience, has been more on the drug development end of working on patient adherence, patient subject continuity in clinical trials, and so on. And I just find that people either get it or they don't, that there's a different way to do it. And I found some of the tension is actually not with the project, but with the people who don't quite know that there could be another way.
100%. And that's why Ellen and I wrote this book, is to provide this common language. So a healthcare administrator, a researcher, someone in pharma and med tech can communicate with each other. And that design is more than just this veneer that you put on a product that's made with by hand or machine, that it's this process. So that's why, when we found that we lacked that language, and I actually started reading Ellen's books a long time ago. I said, this is amazing. I was like, I wish we had something like this in the medical field. So I, chased her down after a talk, and I said, one, sign my book, and I was like, you should write a book on this, because it's really, we really need it. She's like, well, why don't we write one together? I was like, well, I've never written a book, so if you want to do that, yeah.
Well, that's great. You got a great partner.
It was fun. We had fun.
And the book was wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you for answering the question.
I see there's a question in the chat. Let's see. As a designer that has also been a director of marketing in the hospital, written entire websites for other hospitals, and worked for mergers of hospital streams, this seems to combine all of the best ideas for problem solving. Many of the solutions remind me more of the work one might have seen at A Better World by Design in the early days, where prototyping was very common for third world problems, but not in the US. Sorry, I don't know who mentioned that, but if you want to clarify or chat, that would be great.
Yeah, hi, my name is Kyle, and I actually met Ellen many years ago at the AIGA conference in the bathroom with Nancy Skolos from RISD.
Awesome.
I'm free to remember, but it's been a long time. But I work a lot, even though I'm a designer, I work a lot as a marketing strategist and a director, VP of marketing, CMO type of thing in different technology roles, and much in healthcare. And when I did work in-house in a hospital in 2007, people were administrators basically were very skeptical and afraid of design, right? And so it's great to see this where I had been a designer and seen, like I said, and Ellen, you may have even presented at A Better World by Design, I don't know, in the past, but there were so many solutions that people come up with where it's deemed okay when you're solving a problem where people have nothing, right? But not in a scenario in the US where we
and that's changing too.
Yeah. So I think it's just very exciting that you've been doing, this work and that you've created a book about it. And so I'm just glad I just happened to randomly see this. So I haven't read your book yet. I just jumped.
But Kyle, I think your point and Nancy's point about resistance is really important. And what we've seen in this last year of COVID-19 is the breakdown of a lot of that resistance because of the urgency of what's needed. So many more products being approved more quickly, often for emergency use only. Which is problematic for these companies because for them to survive, they need true approval of the product. But there's been this incredible, willingness to work more quickly, more casually, but still with concern for patient safety, which is really important. And it hasn't worked for everyone. I'm communicating with a company in the UK who's creating a new version of the iron lung, which is an incredible humane alternative to intubation. But it's very difficult to have the product approved because it's just so different from what's expected in 2020 for assisted breathing technology, even though this technology was used by thousands of people in the 1950s. But then the same technology is being developed in Bangladesh by a big company there that's involved in lots of different industries and is, collaborating a bit with the guys in the UK. And they're having more success because the regulations are not as extreme. So it's not easy. And I think these questions about resisting design change are very, that's true, right, Bob? It's hard. It's a very conservative industry. Even today, the article in the Times about how companies manufacturing N95 masks in the US can't sell them because the hospitals only want to buy Chinese masks. And it's like, what? What is wrong with this picture? But it's this entrenched ways of doing things. It's very difficult.
So Patrick has a question. Patrick, go ahead.
It's going to be a weird one, but I think you're going to, if we give me the time to ask.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see. So it's really wonderful to see you guys here. Ellen, you gave a talk way back at Concordia University in Montreal where I did my design degree, and I missed it. It was second skin and stuff, and so it's like, oh, and then I think you gave
that's a long time ago.
It was a while ago, yeah. So I collected your books back then. And anyhow, so my name's Patrick. I work in the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, actually in an educational technology unit, but I'm a studio trained designer by background. As I said, I did my degree at Concordia, which was, Bon, it would be a little bit like doing your degree in family. It would be like doing family medicine or emergency medicine, right? Like generalism as a specialty, and that's relevant to my thought or question. So when I was trying to mature in the profession, I got really enamored with the various formulations of design thinking. Of course, there was stuff coming out from Stanford and IDEO in the early 2000s. And so I collect a lot of that stuff. And then sometime later, I found myself, working in this position. I've been in health science education for 12 years now. I've had a chance through that work to design in a space of learning design, but also we get pulled into, as one, you guys are all over the place. You don't differentiate. So we kind of follow faculty where they go, which means, we've done work on patient education, communication stuff, and all sorts of things. And because I just have to say, my colleagues are just wonderfully generous. And also they're like, hey, you're more of an expert than me, so come and help me. So this has been an amazing thing. And so one of the things that's really difficult, and I think you really got to it, is how do we find common languages so that we can work together? And so I find it exciting, but one of the concerns I have now more and more is the instrumentalization of design as a kind of commodity or as a tool. And we know that medicine has a tendency to do that to things, to knowledge, to protocolize, right? And it's a tension within the profession itself. So at the same time, I had a chance to get involved in the health humanities. One of my colleagues who'd like to be here isn't here, and I learned a lot about medicine through the health humanities, about the concept of physicianship and care. And then I started reading books like this in design.
Uh-huh.
Do you guys know this book?
No.
Okay, so this is Harold Nelson and Eric Stolterman. And this is a book about what a design culture could be. They're digging into things like Aristotelian ethics. So a lot of the things, Bon, that you would be familiar with when we talk about what does it mean to be a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
We know that on the one hand, you rely on evidence-based medicine is a big thing. Clinical pathways are a big thing. These decision-making is a big thing, but it's also the physician, the person you cultivate, your character and judgment. So I'm wondering now how you see that as our fields come together and we're encountering each other and working together. I'm hopeful that there can be a sustainable future in which we don't just cannibalize the parts and pieces of design that we like and turn it into, technology, but actually have this real transdisciplinary culture that makes space for the professionals in the health sciences, across the design professions, and also lots of other places. Librarians, for example, are amazing service designers. So that's more like a provocation, I guess. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I would love to elevate the role of design in healthcare systems, that, there are designers embedded on clinical teams, that there are designers at the decision-making table. I think, and that whether we're redesigning a space in the hospital to think about a clinical service line to improving the experience, that design plays an important role in that. There are certain things that medicine does well. We run, let's take the COVID vaccine, for example, remarkable scientific discovery, invention, but there's a lot of things that medicine can't do, there's a lot of problems that can't be solved by a randomized controlled trial. And I think we all want to bring in more empathy and love and care and joy in healthcare that can't be done by a randomized controlled trial. And I think there are ways that we can elevate the role of design in healthcare. And I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that coming. And there's some other folks in the chat there, but I think there's going to be more and more opportunities for designers to embed themselves in healthcare systems.
I can just chip in one thing that you do very well. Not only medicine, but this is very true, is that you have a concept of care. You care. We as designers don't. It's something I had to learn about. And there's a lot that we need to learn from the health science professions to be able to operate in this space, because we're coming in very naively.
Thanks, Patrick. So there's a question from Kyan. I could read it out, or Kyan, if you're still there, you could ask it.
Yes, hi.
Sorry, my name's Kyle, and it wasn't a question. It was just.
No, I think he's talking about.
Kyle, there's someone.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah,
That's okay. That's okay. Kyan, go ahead.
My name's Quinn.
Quinn.
So I'm actually a graduate candidate at OCAD right now, and we are learning about like co-design methods and systems thinking. And I've been kind of like casually browsing like opportunities in the health innovation space. And I'm noticing that there's a lot of like specific roles that require very, like obviously very specific needs that tend to ask for design thinking skills as like a bonus, and they're not necessarily asking for like capital D, capital T, like design thinkers PM to go into the role. So like, how would you consider getting like the foot in the door, or like building on those other skills to kind of get into that space without going to med school?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
well, I think the thing about design thinking is that it is very general. And real design needs more specific and concrete skills. And obviously real healthcare needs more specific and concrete skills. So the beauty of design thinking is that anybody can do it. And that is also its limitation, right? That it is really a method of inquiry. It is not how you get to a finished result. So design teams need real designers who know like software and aesthetics and ergonomics and all kinds of technical stuff about production and manufacturing. And they need real healthcare professionals, and they need patients and patient advocates. And it would be great if all those people had skills in design thinking. But Quinn, I think your anxiety there is well placed, that just having the thinking part is not as strong as having other kinds of expertise as well. That's my opinion. Maybe Bon could add to that.
Agree. And I think there's a lot of variation, because I think healthcare systems don't understand what a designer does. And do we need a UX designer for our website, or do we need an experience designer for a new service line? There are a few systems like Mayo that has a long history of design in a really well-functioning healthcare system. So I think right now you still have to do a little bit of research to figure out, what healthcare systems get it and how to get on those teams.
And then there's many firms, as Nancy will tell you, that specialize in design for healthcare. So IA Collaborative, who was featured on Bon's podcast this week in Chicago, they do all kinds of work in the healthcare space, as we say. IDEO, obviously, Continuum in Boston, many companies involved in it. So the jobs aren't just in hospitals. In fact, I think they're more in design and consulting companies.
Yeah, totally. I agree.
The hospital thing is rare and
Yeah.
cool, super cool.
Okay. We have time for another question, if there is one.
There's a couple in the chat, but if I can steal it, I'd steal it. But I'll let you go through the chat there first.
Oh, sorry, Lawrence. Are you here, Lawrence?
Hi, I'm here. Nice to see you, Alberta folks, again. Calling in from Toronto. Yeah, so my name's Lawrence. I also went to OCAD to go to the Design for Health program. And so my question, and I originally was from the U of A, so my question is about there's these design innovation labs that I've seen here in the Toronto system. There's probably quite a few in the US system as well. I guess that's a bit of a competitive advantage when they talk about hospital systems in the US in that way. So just wondering what your thoughts are on these innovation labs and trying to, bring designers and other innovators into the hospital systems and innovating from there, because there seems to be, I guess, they're working on, improving clinical practices, as you've discussed in the presentation, but there's also a bit of this community outreach and trying to, solve some of the more social, economic, health related issues that are prevalent in the community that's beyond the clinical system. So just wondering about your thoughts on that.
I think there's a lot of flavors in how a healthcare system uses designers. You know, it can be all those things that you had mentioned. And you know what we've been trying to do in our lab, in our healthcare system, we have about 30,000 employees, 15 hospitals, big system here in Philadelphia, that we want to make a case for design research and try to publish in the scientific literature, peer-reviewed journals of why design is important and how design can make a difference. Because again, speaking to my tribe of researchers and doctors, they don't think it's important unless it's in a peer-reviewed study. So we've been some of the work that we've been doing is trying to publish with designers in peer-reviewed academic journals to make that argument that design is more than just kind of this fluffy thing that you bring at the end. And I hate when that happens in healthcare systems, like, oh, well, we've developed this product or the service line, let's bring in designers to make it pretty. I think designers need to be there from the beginning to help us with the research and to help us kind of think about, is this the right problem to solve, and how to go about it.
Lawrence, I also think it's really important to acknowledge the role of patients in all of this. So it's not just hospitals and design companies, it's patients. And I was really moved last week when Anthony Fauci spoke about how AIDS activists in the 80s changed the healthcare system and changed Dr. Fauci. And Dr. Fauci worked with the activists to overhaul the way drugs are approved for compassionate care. And that very revolution that was demanded by patients is now being felt today in the ability to respond to COVID-19 more nimbly. So we can't leave out the patients and the role that they have in design and advocating for their rights.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lawrence. Cody.
Sure. Nice to meet you, Ellen and Bon. Thanks for coming and having a talk with us. So I'm one of the colleagues of Patrick, and we have like the small scale version of what you have, Bon, I would say.
We're pretty small.
We're a desk, like a few desks in the back of an office, or like now in my house. So anyways, you kind of talked about research and you talked about other things about how do you communicate design to clinicians. So for us, one of the ways that we've got a lot of our projects is just from building those really strong relationships with one clinician who then keeps coming back to us with like, oh my God, I saw another place where we could have like quality improvement. And it's really branched off to really interesting ways. I'm wondering what other ways that you've been able to talk about design and bring sort of these processes to different colleagues within your hospital.
Yeah, I think in the same way that you've been doing it is really find that tribe of like-minded people who get it and to work with them. And it helps to have some decision makers too, some people that have either kind of managers or senior level people who are on board, even if it may not translate into funding. But if our CEO and our dean of our medical school are big fans of human-centered design, and that really helps to bring in other folks on projects. So we kind of have the opposite problem right now, where we're having too many people come to us with projects as opposed to us looking out for projects.
That's good.
Thanks.
All right. Well, we're kind of at our time.
Okay.
And I think that's the last question. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up maybe and say thank you to everyone for coming. And also thank you to Ellen and Bon for spending the hour with us.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.
It's so cool to see how involved you are in the design and health world, and how you're trying to bridge those gaps, which, like the two opposing viewpoints that don't always talk to each other. So I think that's really amazing. And I hope we can invite you back for another talk someday and potentially come to some of our classes, or maybe just do another one of these.
Yay.
We'd love to. Yeah, we'd love to see what your students come up with.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
thanks again.
Nice,
and
nice to see a lot of new people and friends. It's great.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Good night.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Good
Yeah.
night.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.